It is very hard to go through transitions like divorce. And our society is predicated on conflicted modeling. Like if you are going through something like a divorce, you are necessarily in a battle. And there's so little collaborative mass messaging. And so I started to wonder, how is it that people can go through this really difficult thing differently?
Hi, I'm Rachel Green, Brooklyn-based divorce mediator and collaborative attorney, and this is my podcast, Keep the Kids in Mind. Join me as I chat with other industry professionals about everything from smoothly navigating your way through divorce to prenups, all the while keeping the kids in mind. Hi, I'm Rachel Green. Welcome to Keep the Kids in Mind. Today, I'm very pleased to have as my guest Cara Raich. Cara, why don't you tell our audience about your background and how you came to this work?
It would be my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be with you. And so for your audience's information, how I came to this work is on the phone with me right now. 20 or so years, well, I'll go back a little further. I am formerly from Canada, and I was a lawyer in Canada and came to the United States almost 25 years ago and practiced law and saw how litigious America is and wondered about how to help people in a less litigious manner. And I started to think about alternative dispute resolution and mediation and came to realize that 25 years ago, the only way to engage in this work meaningfully was through mediation and family mediation. And then I met Rachel Green, and she generously offered to have me work with her, and you taught me so much. You helped me further my education in this work. You recommended places for me to enhance my skills. And that is really how I entered the world of alternative dispute resolution.
And you worked with me for about 5 or 6 years, I think.
I think so.
I practiced, and it was wonderful. And we co-mediated for about probably a year and a half, 2 years, something like that. And
Yeah, you didn't take the training wheels off for a while. You were an excellent mentor.
No, but it was great because co-mediation allows us to, gather more information about what our clients are going through, because inevitably, I just remember after every session, I would turn to you and say, this person was feeling this way. And you would say, and I was noticing the other person was feeling that way, and it's like having two sets of eyes. It just gave us so much more information for guiding people through. So it will experience in my practice as well, having you as part of it. And then you went on to do a lot of very interesting things. You've been a real innovator in the field of divorce and families and helping people navigate these transitions.
Thank you. I just want to say a word about co-mediation, if I can, because you brought it up. Part of the work is noticing and sitting with folks who are in moments of difficulty. We transmit a lot of information through our body language and through our how we show up in the space. And when there are two people and two mediators, you can really take in a lot more information. And so I'm not surprised that our observations and our understanding was expanded by being together. So to the other point that you made around innovating, it is very hard to go through transitions like divorce. And our society is predicated on conflicted modeling. Like if you are going through something like a divorce, you are necessarily in a battle. And there's so little collaborative mass messaging. And so I started to wonder, how is it that people can go through this really difficult thing differently? When I engage in what I would call pre-divorce counseling, it's often about elevating the how. Like, people who work in conflict resolution understand that bad how makes bad what. And the process of divorce is
Wait, I'm sorry. Bad how makes bad
what?
What? Bad what? Okay.
Right. And so the how of what it is that you do impacts the what, the thing that you are doing. And oftentimes litigation is not good how for post-divorce co-parenting. And so I sort of use a joke and I say to folks I say to them, what are your goals for this process? And they're like, well, we want it to be low conflict and we want it to be best for the kids. And then they tell me they've hired 2 adversarial attorneys. And I would say, well, why are you going to the dentist to get your appendix out? Because it's essentially the same thing where you say you want to buy product X, but you're going to a store that doesn't sell that product. And so I help elevate people's awareness to match up the thing they say they want with the service providers, with the professionals who will help them execute the thing that they say they want. And I am not Pollyanna, as you know. I think there are appropriate process choices for different circumstances. And I do not think litigation is wrong for everybody. I do think it is wrong for more people and to engage in it, right? So in other words, I think there are people in litigation who would have benefited tremendously from a different process choice had they known it existed or understood what it was. Mediation unfortunately suffers from a lack of comprehension about what it is and how it works and what it means in the popular discourse too. So as much as there's a knee-jerk feeling that divorce is a legal problem. And I like to tell folks, it is a family matter that has a legal element. It's not a lawsuit that happens to be about a family. And we have to shift the way that we think about divorce. And this is a separate conversation and you didn't ask, and I'm going to stop talking in a second, but
Okay.
we also have to think about the role of the law in a divorce process and define the role of the law so that it doesn't become Godzilla sitting behind the couch when you're talking to each other.
So when you say our society, that not going into battle is not in the mainstream. I mean, are you talking about like movies and television and the media? Because certainly that's true. I mean, we rarely see mediation on the screen, and when we do, it's usually a really botched portrayal of what happens in mediation. It always drives me crazy. I'll turn on, I'll hear that there's going to be mediation in some TV show, and I turn it on, and it's 2 people just screaming at each other in the room, and the mediator just sits there and goes, I guess you can't resolve it. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, why doesn't the mediator say this? Why doesn't the mediator say that? This is what I would do if I were on this show.
So of course, people like us, we Monday morning quarterback, TV portrayals of alternative dispute resolution and mediation. But the reality is when we watch media, there's so much mythology around what a divorce is, and it's wrong. I mean, Kramer versus Kramer was sort of like the seminal sort of piece. But whenever we read about, even in non-fictional media, in maybe tabloids are fake too, but in the less sort of formal media, when we talk about divorce, it's always a battle. It's always the description, the salacious details of the battle. And so when regular folks have to go through this transition of getting divorced, our meta messaging is, now I have to go to war. And that's so counterintuitive to a successful post-divorce life for a family. And so it's so important that folks seek out information to help them make the best decisions they can to be able to go forward during a time of trauma and difficulty.
Yeah, I mean, I find the litigation system, frankly, puzzling. I mean, just because I have found an alternative, and I like to say that your child will never thank you for destroying their other parent.
Well, this is, of course, the crux of the challenge. What I like to say to folks is, when one goes about getting divorced, it's really important to remember that, or to think about divorce through the lens of, it is the restructuring of your family. It is the emotional, financial, and physical restructuring of your family. It's not the end of your family. And what a litigation, if you think of like a business litigation, two partners in a business who are in a fight, they sue each other, one wins, one loses, and they move on. But the incentive to retain relationship between co-parents is the crux of a successful co-parenting relationship. And so if a couple gets into a divorce, and look, there are reasons for litigation, and to my friends who practice this work, you serve an important role for our society. But for most people, this is a negotiation, it's a conversation, it's an exploration about how to move forward. And a litigation is an external process that informs how you move forward in a way that removes a lot of control from the participants. And so my hope and my wish for people I work with is that they make informed, thoughtful process decisions about how they're going to move forward.
That's a really great point. That the law, we think of it as a legal problem that just happens to involve a family, and you're saying we need to turn that on its head.
A little bit, yeah.
It's a family restructuring that is touched in some places by the law. I'm always kind of amazed at how many elements there are that people want to talk about in mediation or in a collaborative process, that the law would have no opinion about. I mean, all of the things having to do with, scheduling, religious education, all of the decisions that parents make when they're still living together without any intervention from the state. And then when they're divorcing, suddenly there's this intervention from the state. And it really, parents still have the right to parent their children according to their values, their hopes, their visions for how they want to raise their children. They're still going to be raising their children, even when they're divorced, or separated, or not living in the same home. And the law doesn't have an opinion as to whether your daughter signs up for that intensive class at New York City Ballet School. You have to, look at her and her interest in ballet, and decide whether you want her to have her whole high school years subsumed by studying ballet or not. That's just one example.
I think you're right that, and that's why when I do engage in this counseling, I talk to parents about the fact that, and we're just focusing on parents. We can shift to couples who don't have children too, but this podcast is called Keeping the Children Centered, right? So we'll focus on the kids. But the reality is, whether you're married and living in the same household or you're co-parenting in different households, that discussion about the ballet, intensive or not, is the same, right? If you disagree about what is best for your child, you would disagree about that whether you were married or you weren't. And so the question is a how question. How
married people have conflicts too, Cara?
In fact, they do. And in fact, they also have parenting conflicts that sometimes bring them to people like you and me for family mediation. That's because it is challenging and emotional. And, so it becomes a how question. Like, how do you talk about these parenting disputes? And a well-executed mediation, as you all know, elevates parents' awareness around, if these disputes come up, and they probably will, what is the process you are going to use to talk about them? And so I think there's like 3 buckets of topic within what we're talking about. One is the role of the law. The other is, what process choice do you use to execute the negotiation around how you're going to move through the conflict of a divorce and come out the other side. So that's the how question. You alluded to collaborative law. We could talk a little bit about that, mediation, litigation, all the different ways that you can go about executing this. And then I think there's also, I hate that people say the soft stuff, because it's actually the most important stuff, but the co-parenting relationship And all the things that, as you rightly say, have nothing to do with the law. The law doesn't care if your kid goes to soccer or baseball. The law doesn't care if the kid goes to your house for Christmas and your house for Rosh Hashanah. Those are not legal problems. And those are conversations that have to happen. And somebody like me would say, if you're in a highly conflicted divorce, like in a litigation, those conversations become a lot harder.
They become a lot harder, and sometimes they don't even happen.
Or they can't happen, and then you have intermediaries assisting you. There are parenting coordinators, and there are all these professionals that exist in the world to help. And they exist because they are needed. And there are cases where they're really needed, but for most people, they're not. And so part of our job as conflict resolution professionals is also elevating their skill level to help them have these conversations when we're not in the room with them. And help them see each other with compassion and with curiosity and with dignity and with grace, because it's very hard to go through what they're going through.
Yeah. And just a note about people who are separating and don't have children, they have just as many interests in this process, in making this process something that they won't look back in 5 years and wince thinking about their behavior, because they'll always have been a part of each other's history, even if they're not going to be a part of each other's future.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I'm working with a couple who met in college, and now they're in their 40s, and they have treated each other with courtesy and honor throughout their marriage, and they really they very eloquently said that they wanted to continue that. They wanted to feel like they did this in the spirit that they aspired to, and that's why they were choosing mediation.
This matters because there's a principle that how you say goodbye is also how you say hello. And in some ways, to move on with integrity enables sort of a shedding of the weight a little bit, not immediately. I can imagine folks listening to this saying, they don't know what they're talking about. This is the most horrendous thing I've ever gone through. And how am I ever going to come out the other side? And what I would say to those folks is, I see you. I know this is incredibly difficult. There are deep disappointments and almost a mourning period of the future you thought you were going to have and that you're not. And it's deeply sad. And what I would advocate for isn't a particular process choice, but it's a thinking about the how to help make this very hard time less conflicted. And the benefit of engaging in a process that gives, what folks sometimes don't realize is that in a litigation adversarial model, you are ceding a lot of your authority to a professional standing in your stead and speaking for you and negotiating for you. And in a mediative intervention, you are retaining that autonomy and you are seeking help. Certainly, there's a role of the law, and we can talk about that, and you need to make informed legal decisions, but you're advocating for yourself. And if that's appropriate, it's a much more empowering way to move forward. And I'll just say that there's psychological data to suggest that folks who participate in the crafting of solutions are more likely to follow them. And if the process has integrity and you believe in it, you're less likely to have post-divorce conflict because you've helped craft the solution.
Yeah. So I liked your identifying that there are kind of three things that we're talking about. Maybe we can go back and talk about them all. The first one you mentioned was the role of the law in this process. And when you do an out-of-court process such as mediation or collaborative negotiation, I think that the couple, the family, has the right to decide what role they want the law to be. When lawyers are negotiating for people, they tend to want to stick with the plain vanilla law, and they get very upset when you try to do something varying from that. But in negotiated out of court, we can talk about whatever they want to talk about.
I think that's very important. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut off your question. Go ahead. What I would say is often the response we get is, well, I follow the law. I don't, the law says don't steal. I'm not going to steal. The law says don't kill people. I'm not going to kill people. And it's almost like a shock when you find out that in divorce, you can kind of do what you want with each other as long as you both agree and it's within the bounds of relative legality, right? And so if parents agree, they do not have to follow the law in the book. And that just that point that you made about we can talk about anything. We can engage in the soccer baseball conversation. We can speak in a much more holistic and expansive way than the letter of the law. So folks like to say, well, money transfers between spouses in very particular ways in the context of divorce, and the law says how to do it. And it's shocking to people to find out that actually we can talk about it differently in mediation. And we can use what I call the F word. And the F word in mediation, I would submit, is not the scary F word that you think I'm going to say on a podcast, but it's not. It's fairness. And it is okay if each party to this conversation disagrees about what fairness is. But I think it's really important to elevate and make that implicit explicit around what each person thinks is fair.
Right. And why.
And why. And the law doesn't care about that.
No, the law doesn't. I mean, and it's funny because property in a divorce is divided according to principles that are called equitable distribution, which just means fair.
Right.
But what each person thinks is fair might be different and
be radically different. And that's called it the F word.
And for example, an inheritance received during the marriage is considered to be the separate property of the person who inherits it, as long as they keep it in their separate name. So if you're working with lawyers, they will tend to say, okay, you inherited this. What records do you have? Where did you put the money? Oh, you put it in a joint bank account? That's it. It's gone. You kept it separate? That's it. It's separate. And next issue. But in mediation, I've had people who've said, well, our whole marriage, we've been married 28 years, and the whole time we've talked about this $6 million that we're going to inherit from your mother, and your mother now is 96 and ailing, and we're probably going to get that soon. And our whole marriage, neither of us put any money in our retirement accounts. So now you're going to inherit $6 million, and I'm going to get bupkis, and I have nothing saved for retirement. I didn't think about that. You're right. You're making a good point. How about I'll give you a portion of my inheritance when I get it?
Or, to play devil's advocate, an adversarial attorney would say, she's 96, just don't get divorced yet. But inheritance is a wonderful example of when fairness becomes the F word. But I'll give a different example than the one.
One second. Even if they're married, if the inherits and keeps it in their separate name, a lawyer would say,
yeah,
right.
Well, one lawyer would say, do not spend 1 cent of it on shared expenses, and the other person would be like, get him to spend something, take care of the dinner on it. But but it becomes, my point is that it becomes more of a game and less about, it's more in that more adversarial perspective, it becomes more about playing the system and using the law to your advantage or disadvantage of the other person. Whereas in mediation, you can have a more holistic conversation about what feels fair. And another inheritance example is where there maybe wasn't explicit financial planning around the inheritance coming, but the inheritance will come. And consequently, I feel like it's more fair if I get the apartment, because at some point you will have more money. And my parents were poor, and I'm going to get nothing from that inheritance. And you will, and you're going to be okay. And given that we are both co-parents, it's important that I'm okay too. And there's a lot of what we didn't talk about is the correlation between financial decision-making and co-parenting. And they're correlated very much too.
Right. Because children will know if they have one poor parent and one rich parent.
Of course.
And I have had numerous people come in for prenups because they said my dad was completely screwed over by my mom in their divorce that took 5 years from when I was 8 to 13. And that's my childhood and that's my reality into adulthood. And I cannot get married without a prenup to make sure that that doesn't happen to me if my marriage doesn't work. And, what kind of legacy do you want to leave is part of this question.
It is part of this question. I think what I often find myself telling folks is if dad is the only one who has the PlayStation, whose house is Johnny going to want to go spend time at?
Right.
And that's like a little example, but it's illustrative of the larger question, which is if one parent is left with a radically different lifestyle, that's a lot of implicit messaging to the child.
Yeah.
And I urge parents to think very hard about that, whether and what sometimes the idea of fairness and that reality are in tension with each other. And I'll give you an example, like, well, he's a bum and I don't want to finance his life because of X, Y, and Z. And the question becomes, your child knows on some articulated unconscious level. I mean, what I'm about to say is a little bit heteronormative, but I think it's true for any family that children know they are part. Each parent is part of them. And if one of their parents is a terrible person who is not worthy is not worthy in whatever way, then part of them might not be worthy too. And as you imagine centering children in this process, it's important to remember that that kind of messaging can harm the self-confidence of a child who is at an impressionable age, and are forming their own self-identity. And so giving them permission to love their other parent. And I recognize I can almost hear the pushback from parents out there listening. Well, you don't know the exact circumstances and all of these things happen. I know, and I know it's very hard, but when you are truly imagining putting your child first in this process, it is important to unconsciously message that it is permissible to love their other parent.
Yeah.
And that keeping your criticism of that person for your friends or your counselor or your therapist is a better way to articulate your dissatisfaction with your co-parent.
Right.
Unless there's a safety issue, that's a separate.
Right. And when the child is not even in your home, it's the best time to do that parenting.
I think children often, I explain to parents, and I'm sure you do too, children know the truth of their families.
Yes, I think they always do.
And even if you don't trash their mom or their dad, when they're older, they'll probably thank you, but also they know.
Right.
And even when they're little, the walls have ears. It's really important while you are going through this process and while you are still living in the same home to be really mindful of what little ears are hearing.
Well, and not only that, I mean, I heard a story where a client told me that his father had his mother had gone away like to visit her sister, and when he was 9, and the father had this big party, and his girlfriend came to the party, and then his parents had huge fights, and he didn't know what happened, but he knew that his parents were both very upset and they were arguing a lot, and they separated shortly afterwards. Well, this guy just tucked this information away. Like, he remembered hearing his father say, he's only 9, he doesn't know what's going on. Well, you know what? Kids don't stay 9. They become 10 and 11 and 15 and 25. He figured it out. He kind of went back and he went, holy crap, my father had his girlfriend come to our house while my mother was away. He grew up like knowing about this very poor judgment that his father.
Well, I was just going to say that is exquisitely poor judgment, but it's also unkind, right?
Yeah.
It's unkind to his son, and it's certainly unkind to his mother, or his son's mother.
Right.
And I think there's a moment here, and this is so hard because we're all human. to think about whether you want to be right or whether you want to be smart. And sometimes they're really different. And they're different in a lot of ways in a divorce process. We could talk about that for a while, but it is so difficult when a divorce is happening and it's emotionally painful. It is so difficult to sublimate your own feelings, to be intellectual and make good business decisions. I have so much respect for people who engage in mediation and center their children, because sometimes it's so counterintuitive and so difficult, even though it's parental instinct to center children when you are in pain. It is so hard not to externalize that trauma.
Yeah.
And I respect people who get through the process with dignity and integrity and who are able to center their children.
I do too. I know it's very hard and it's very painful, and it's hard to not lash out when you're hurt.
It really is.
It really is. So, Cara, you offer something that you call pre-divorce planning?
Counseling.
Sorry. And how do people find you, and what is that service comprised of?
So people often find me by word of mouth, frankly, but my website is cararaich.com, CARARAICH.com. But
we'll link to that in the show notes too.
Oh, okay, that's fine. But, and actually I don't talk about this work on my website. I largely because I do other things too. But with this, the conversation is not about why you're getting divorced. It's not about whether you ought to get divorced. It's you have come to a place where you believe you want to get divorced, and you'd like to understand what are the products on the market that help you do that. And what does it mean to get divorced? And how does money change hands? Not strategically in your case, but money can change hands 3 ways in divorce. Equitable distribution. What does that mean? Not in your case specifically, but generally. Spousal support, child support. What are those things? What are they for? And so it's not an advice giving conversation. It's almost like a lecture. It's a collaborative conversation, but it's like, what is the information I need? I sort of help people think about how can they make informed process decisions before they start making strategic, substantive decisions. And I would urge people to talk to me before they tell their children, because there are best practices for how to do those things. And I help people not step in it. I help them think about who is in their inner circle that they can tell this to while it's not public. There's all these sort of conflict traps along the way that I help elevate people's awareness around. And we talk about the role of the law, because that matters. And what they wish the role of the law to be in their conversation with each other. And what is different about what I do, I do talk to people individually, but what does not exist to my knowledge in the marketplace is a non-therapeutic, sort of a mediative style conversation, a task-oriented conversation for the couple, where together they are beginning the journey of making a process choice. Sometimes you get served papers and you don't have a choice, right? The people I talk to, that's usually not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is they're like, can we understand what a litigation looks like? Can we understand what a collaborative process looks like? All the way to, we just want to do this ourselves. FYI out there, don't do this yourself. You are an expert at lots of things, but you are not experts in divorce. Your friend who got divorced is an expert in their divorce, but they're not an expert in divorce. So, I sort of talk about who are the people you're going to listen to, what is the advice you're going to take, how are you going to listen to your inner voice. I talk to folks about how they are the best experts in each other and in their life together. And whatever well-meaning, loving, kind people are in their life who wish them well, those are not the people whose advice you should be taking around this. Talk to people who have a 10,000-foot view about the process and think really hard about who's going to help you. The last thing I'll say on this is people don't realize that divorce is one of the biggest financial decisions they will ever make in their life. And they should treat the how with equal seriousness.
Yeah. Well, also the costs are so vastly
Oh,
different.
and of course, well, right. I mean, a litigation, like a true knockdown, I'm going to destroy you divorce litigation is six figures, like
Yeah.
possibly each, right? So there's a cost decision on that, but there's also what does that get me in the end? Like,
Yeah.
what is the thing? And sometimes it is a level of disclosure that you don't think you're going to get. Sometimes it could be a complicated family business on the other side that you don't understand and that you don't have transparency around. There's a lot of reasons to engage in a litigation, but for most people, that's not what they need. And what folks find shocking is that over 98% of divorces settle.
Yeah.
So most of them are not decided by a judge. So the
Right.
question is, you're going to negotiate. And what is the how on that negotiation? And what is the tone of that negotiation?
Yeah. And also the courts are very backed up right
Oh,
now.
yeah.
I've been working with a couple that's in family court, working on custody and their children's schedule and finances and child support as well. And they come into mediation. They're not reaching agreement. They go, well, we have a hearing scheduled on Tuesday. They go to the hearing, and I send out an email and go, what happened at the hearing to both of them? And I get answers back, nothing. The judge adjourned us. We didn't get near the judge. We didn't talk to the judge. We talked to the judge's law secretary who said, work it out. They went to court, I think 5 times during the process that I was working with them. So they kept coming back to mediation, and they put together two agreements themselves, one for their child's parenting and schedule and the other one for the support.
So you raise an interesting, you didn't say it exactly like this, but you're referring to the fact that there is a perception that justice happens in court.
Right.
And there is an unarticulated, implicit definition that people have about justice, which in this context usually means, and the judge will do the thing that I need them to do, which is, side with me. And because I'm right. And that's not how the courts work. Our judges have many, 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 many cases. And in the family and divorce realm, if there isn't abuse, neglect, addiction, danger to the child, it's not a particularly compelling legal case.
Right.
So judges are going to give you the clerk and they're going to pressure you to settle because they need you off their docket. And that doesn't lend itself to the most thoughtful, tailored decisions and outcomes. And so things end up getting done quickly. They end up being done not thoughtfully. And yes, they're legally binding, but they don't help.
Right.
Maybe they say, okay, you get $10 a month in child support and $10 a month in spousal support, but they still haven't helped you solve the soccer baseball question. They still haven't helped you figure out how the kid is going to get from, Staten Island to the Bronx on Thursday. Like these things are not going to help you get, but if you are in a mediative, more holistic conversation, you can brainstorm solutions and talk about solutions to those very challenging logistic co-parenting questions.
Yeah. Well, Cara, I think we're running out of time for this morning. I would love to have a part 2 with you where we talk about all the other interesting things that I know you're involved with in peacemaking. And maybe we can do that in the future. But it's been a pleasure talking to you this morning. Thank you so much for coming on. Keep your kids in mind.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And this was a true full circle moment for me because my career in alternative dispute resolution and mediation started with you. And so it's a real joy to be here.